All right, so let's get back to that 10 seconds of videotape.
Yeah.
The exact line, even though everyone says it's heck of a job, Brownie,
Right.
they don't even get that right. He actually said, Brownie, you're doing a heck of a
Yes.
job. So
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to clean that up for you because even that line they don't get quite right.
Right.
Okay. How many days into the hurricane was that?
Oh gosh, I want to say it was maybe 4, maybe 5 days. I conflate time, but 4 or 5 days.
Okay, so 4 or 5 days.
Yeah.
Now I watched plenty of other video today
Right.
of what you were doing at the time, and
Yeah.
you're standing there. People can see this on YouTube. You're standing there with giant maps of the whole area. It was very clear to me, at least watching it now,
Right.
that you had total command of where things were and who was supposed to be where, and
Right.
where water was going to hit harder, and
Yes.
and
Right.
Bush, to his credit, it seemed that he was listening along with you
Yes.
and doing the best job I think that he could.
Yeah.
After, was it 3 minutes after he says that you realized, or that the media went crazy with it?
No, it was the minute he said it. Because here's what you don't know. What most people don't know is that I had told I called Air Force One and said, when he lands and gets here, I need 5 minutes before we do any sort of public photo op. Mm-hmm. And when you, even at my level, the undersecretary, even when you say I got to have 5 minutes with the president, they still want to know why. Mm-hmm. And I said, because he's got to understand before he walks in front of cameras how bad things are in New Orleans. Because we're going to leave that Air National Guard base, get on Marine One, and we're going to fly to New Orleans. And he's going to start seeing how screwed up it is in New Orleans. And I want to make sure he understands that before he gets there. So sure, we got plenty of time. So we walk into the green room. I'm just starting to talk to the president, and they come in and say, we got to get moving. Press is out here. We're already running late. And they pull him out, and I don't have time to brief him on how bad it is.
Wow.
So the moment, and here's what really happened. Bob Riley, who was the governor of Alabama, former congressman, good friend of mine, we were doing great in Alabama. Things were perfect in Alabama. Things were very good in Mississippi. It was just Louisiana. So Bob Riley, being the supportive guy that he is, said, oh, by the way, Mr. President, I just want you to know that FEMA's doing a great job in Alabama. And that's when the president said, boom, slapped me in the gut. And it was at that moment, Dave, that I knew, oh my God. Now, 3 things have happened. The press knows that I've got a relationship with the president, that I have a nickname. Mm-hmm. So I'm one of the few people in the inner circle that has a nickname. 2, the press knows how bad things are in New Orleans. And now both me and the boss look like we're totally out of touch about what's happening down the Gulf.
God, I mean, there's so much there when you really realize
Right.
how this was happening.
Yeah, I was, if you watch that closely, you'll see me grimace because I was just like, holy.
Yeah. So, okay, so once that happened, how much of what your job became was just dealing with media craziness?
Total. Not just the media, but now with a Secretary of Homeland Security by the name of Michael Chertoff, who had never done any sort of operations in his life. He was an appellate court judge. An appellate court judge has clerks that bring you briefs and say, here's what we think your decision should be. You sit behind a desk, you take your time. You don't realize that if you put off a decision for 30 minutes in the middle of a disaster, that translates to 3 hours, and that costs lives. So now I'm dealing with a boss in DC that doesn't have a clue what he's doing, who's mad at me because I'm on a Gulf Stream trying to get from Mobile to Gulfport to Baton Rouge to New Orleans and trying to keep my fingers on everything going on, who tells me, I'm tired of you flying around because I can't find you. And I'm thinking, you can't find me? I'm on a government Gulf Stream that's got satellite. You can find me anywhere in the world if you want to. So tells me to plant my butt in Baton Rouge, and I turn to my staff and say, this is the beginning of the end. They're after me. The media's after me, Chertoff's after me, they're looking for a scapegoat. I'm not that stupid. I mean, I know what's going on.
Yeah. Are there any points of criticism during that time that you think are legit?
Yes. I have a friend who is a psychiatrist at the Kennedy School of Government and the School of Public Health. And I asked him one time, I said, there was a point during Katrina where you haven't known me but a few minutes now, but I think you can tell I'm a pretty type A person, pretty energetic, I'm pretty engaged in whatever I do, I'm passionate about what I do. And I asked my buddy, I said, so I know that there was a point where I was just frozen. I literally could not make a decision. What happens? He drew me a cartoon, and it's a you know the Great Wizard of Oz. Well, it's a picture of me in the first panel, pushing all these buttons and levers and turning wheels and stuff. And in the second panel, I'm staring at that same group of buttons, like, what's going on? And in the third panel, I've gone around to look behind, and all the wires have been cut. And he says that physiologically, whether it's PTSD, it's a natural phenomenon in the brain, that when we are trained, like if I have trained myself that when I tell my staff do X, I expect X to happen. When you and I turn on these lights or flip a switch, we expect the lights to come on. Now you add all of the physical stress, the emotional stress, and nothing is working, the brain starts to shut down. And I will freely admit, and this is why I to this day, I saw a firefighter the other day on the street. I was having lunch, and I walked up to him and I said, "What are you doing?" "We've been doing training, and I'm taking the guys out for lunch." And I said, "Well, you don't know who I am, but let me just tell you that you know, making sure those guys have time off and that they get rest, that's the most important thing you can do, because if they don't get rest when they're fighting the fires, they themselves can become victims of that disaster." So we've got to learn to train ourselves that when we're under that kind of stress, you have to be able to step back. And this is when I speak about resilience. I've learned to try to teach audiences that we all have a network. And what we have to do is learn that when we find ourselves in those moments that we're either not making the right decisions or we're not making decisions, we need some external force to come in and kind of slap some sense into us and say, change your perspective. What I see is this. If somebody had helped me do that during Katrina, might have still had the presidential bus run me over, but at least I would have known why and what was happening.
But is that almost counter to the way a sort of big government has to operate?
Of course it is.
Right? Like you can't have people running around smacking people and trying to get them to wake up because the machine is so stiff.
Right.
Basically.
But what I needed, and you could, my very best friend and my lawyer, Andy Lester, who went through all the congressional hearings with me. To this day, he'll tell you that he regrets not getting in his car and driving to Baton Rouge, because he's watching this from a distance and he's seeing what's happening, and he knows me well enough that he could tell that I'm just frozen, like nothing's working. What do I do next? And I just needed that external force to come in and say, you're right, nothing's working, here's why, let's take inventory. Have you slept? No, I haven't slept for 3 days. Well, maybe you ought to go try to take an Ambien and at least get 4 hours of sleep. It's that kind of stuff that makes a huge difference.
But at that point, also with what was happening because of the media, you were sort of just in a feeding frenzy.
Oh,
it was like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It was absolutely self-fulfilling. That's right.
Yeah.
You know, to this day, I'm always amazed. I mean, I could go through the litany of falsehoods that I'm no longer defensive about because they're falsehoods and it is what it is. And I love talking about them in front of, you know, corporate CEOs and titans of industry who think they know that they can run everything. Well, let me tell you, someday the proverbial feces is going to hit the fan in your company, and you're going to want to learn these lessons and learn them well.
That's why I run a small business here.
Good for you.
I feel like we have a very little management here.
Very
you know
good.
what I mean?
That's right.
What do you make of just sort of I guess this is just part of the human condition, the idea that we always need someone to blame. Now, you are acknowledging that not everything went right, and you didn't make every right decision, and we're acknowledging government nonsense and all that. But just this need to blame, because I think you are one of the first examples, because maybe it was sort of just at the beginnings of social media or online stuff, of just like, let's just take this guy, we didn't know who he was yesterday,
flog him to death,
and let's just destroy, we'll destroy his career, and then we'll try to destroy his life.
Yeah.
What do you make of just that general psychological precept?
Well, there is there's two ways to look at it. In Judaism, there is the philosophy of finding the scapegoat, and putting all the sins of the community, putting all the sins of the village on the goat, and throwing the goat over the cliff. Well, I think that really is applicable to life in general. And we have, through social media, I can't even imagine what it would have been like with social media back in 2005. It was brutal enough without it. But I think we have, when you think about the hierarchy of needs that people have, belonging, love, power, social media has amplified all of those. And the feeling of being superior to somebody else so permeates our society that any chance we have to squish somebody, it makes, I don't know whether it's an endorphin rush, adrenaline, but something, but we now have this horrible, horrible desire to just destroy people. They have lives, they have families. Now, some people, maybe they deserve it, maybe they don't. But I like to think that everybody, unless you're just totally a doofus, people are actually trying to do the best they can.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a firm believer in that.
Yeah.
But yes, of course, there are people that want to just destroy.
Yes.
And unfortunately, I think social media has amplified
but
those
you know what
people.
the best antidote to that is? Me. Because I refused to stay down. There were people that actually advised me, you need to slither away. And I was like, are you kidding? I cannot wait for these congressional hearings because I can't wait for some dumbass congressman or dumbass senator who thinks that he's God's gift to creation to ask me a question because I'm going to tell him the truth whether he likes it or not.
So let's talk about those hearings a little bit because when you see just any hearing,
Right.
any hearing related to anything,
Yes.
it strikes me as patently obvious that pretty much the senators and congressmen have almost no idea what they're talking about, really.
Right.
But they've been handed a brief.
Correct.
And they've been told by a handler or whoever, these are the 3 questions you got to ask because we got to get you on CNN tonight so then you can push this and blah, blah, blah. Do the hearings, when they're trying to unpackage all of this, do the hearings ever make things better at the end? Like, is there ever a hearing that ends and then they go, we really solved the problems of why Katrina happened, why the levees failed, what the problems were with FEMA or with our other responders, et cetera, et cetera?
Rarely. In fact, let me tell you, it's actually worse than what you think it is.
Right, it's just more government growing.
It's more government growing, but to tell you how bad it really is, as the undersecretary, if I'm going to testify, now I was a private citizen when I testified in the Katrina hearings.
Yeah. Wait, just to be clear, so how long after the heck of a job, Brownie, till you resigned?
Well, I actually, interestingly, I resigned on September 11th of 2005, but then they came to me and said, oh, we need you to stay on because we've got to figure out just what's going on because they're going to come after the administration. So we want to keep you in the fold for a while. So they kept me on as a consultant for I want to say 4 or 5 months afterwards, and then I pulled.
You must have been seriously pissed at that point because now you knew you were just saying.
Yes. Yeah. So I pulled the trigger and said, no more consulting. I'm a private citizen, and so when I'm called to testify, the White House has to do one of 2 things. They have to either accept that I'm going to tell the truth, or they have to invoke executive privilege and prevent me from testifying. And we deliberately set it up with Susan Collins and Joe Lieberman for Senator Lieberman to ask me a question about conversations with the president or the White House, so that when that question was asked, my lawyer could say, my client wants to answer the question, but he cannot if the White House is going to invoke executive privilege, which then allowed Senator Lieberman, see how the charade works?
Yeah.
Then allows Senator Lieberman to ask, is there anyone in this hearing room from the White House who wants to invoke executive privilege? And of course, the room's silent.
I'm pretty sure that's not how it works. Right. I don't know everything about government.
Right.
Yeah.
And Senator Lieberman laughed and said, oh, I'm sure there are plenty of people from the White House here, but apparently nobody wants to invoke executive privilege. Mr. Brown, answer the question. And boom, we were off to the races. But to go back about just a regular hearing.
Yeah.
If an undersecretary or any other government official is going to go testify, his testimony is cleared through the Office of Management and Budget. That testimony is given to the senators and congressmen in advance. The questions are given to the witness in advance. It is a show. Yeah. It is a production.
How much of it also is that they're asking you things as if everything sort of works perfectly? In any of the hearings, in Hillary, the Benghazi hearings, just any of these hearings, where they're asking minute by minute, what did you say then to this person, that person? I mean, I know in my own daily life, you asked me what happened 3 days ago at noon.
Right. I don't know.
I'd have to think about it for a while,
Right.
but maybe I can figure it out.
Maybe not. You come up with it, right?
Yeah, but just that they're trying to get you on every little thing, plus the pressures of you're under oath, you
Right.
have the media watching and everything
Right.
else. I mean,
Right.
it just seems like it's a recipe for nothing good, nothing substantial to come out.
Nothing substantial does come out of them. Now, I think there's an exception if in the House or Senate, if they are truly conducting an investigation. And here's how to tell if they're truly conducting an investigation. They'll depose witnesses outside the hearing room. They will ask a witness, either voluntarily or with a subpoena, to come in and subject to a deposition by staff lawyers. That's a real investigation. That's really sitting you down and saying, swear to tell the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Now let us ask you a series of questions. And that can actually result in something productive. Now for the witness, you have to be very careful because like anything else, to your point, what'd you do on Wednesday at noon? I went to this bagel shop down the street and had lunch. What was the name of it? Well, I think it was X. They find out actually you went to a burger stand and had a burger. Now they got you on perjury.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
It really is crazy. So what was the resolution then? When the hearings ended, like what do they do? So then they issue a report.
They issued a report.
Right? There's a report.
Right.
And
the report was the report. I get a kick out of this because the report virtually acknowledged everything that I had said was wrong about the integration of FEMA and these other agencies into DHS. There was a virtual admission to that. Then the things that they wanted to do to correct it were, I don't want to over-exaggerate, so let's just say 50%. They, in essence, adopted about 50% of the things that I've been arguing about. Now, is it working? It's not working because the way things go in DC, whoever has the money has the power. And you can't, I'm using the current FEMA director, who's a former employee of mine as an example. You can't expect him on a day-to-day basis.
What's his name?
Brock Long.
Okay.
Used to be at the National Hurricane Center, emergency manager in Alabama. He's a great guy. I love this guy. Probably shouldn't have said that because that will probably hurt him somehow. I just now regret having said that. Let's edit that out.
We don't edit for content here, but you probably made his tenure about a year shorter.
Right, exactly.
Good work.
So where was I going with that?
Well, the reports. And
the report. So if you're fighting on a day-to-day basis for your budget with the Secretary of Homeland Security and all the other undersecretaries, and then when a disaster hits, now you're the boss and the secretary is subordinate to you, can you imagine doing that in the private sector? One day you're the CEO, but under certain circumstances, you as the CEO are actually subordinate to somebody else on your staff. I mean, that's an untenable situation, but that's kind of the situation they created with the post-Katrina Act.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
So we touched obviously on the media portion of this, and I mentioned how when I was Googling you this morning as I'm doing research, half the articles come up are about the 10-year anniversary, and they're still attacking.
Yes.
Now again, you have sat here and acknowledged that you did not do everything perfectly.
Right.
But what do you make of that in a more broad sense about the media? Because I talk about the media a lot here, and I'm extremely frustrated with mainstream media. And it's almost gotten to the point where every time they write something bad about somebody, I start thinking that they're actually the good guy.
Yeah.
Because I see the way they do it to me. Even.
Right.
That the media really has completely gotten out of control.
They've lost all integrity. They've lost all. This is what I do on my own radio program. Is I don't ever try to tell people what to think. I try to give them a different perspective so that they can, with their own minds, maybe think about something a different way. The media, if you look through those 10-year anniversary things, there's one example that just stands out that to this day irritates me. I had the highest level of security clearances with the CIA, the NSA. I had a Q clearance with the Department of Energy, which means I had access to all the nuke secrets and everything else. I mean, I top secret special access programs, that was me.
I don't know if you're going to drop any other secret knowledge while you're on the show.
Yeah, that's right. So I had all these clearances and everything else. Time magazine ran a story that I had lied on my resume. Now, my first reaction when they ran that story was, sue the bastards. I want to go after them. And then my lawyer starts explaining to me, okay, first of all, you're going to have to prove they did it with willful malice because you're a public figure. Then you're going to have to go through all of the strain and time and energy of depositions and a trial and hearings. And do you want to relive all of that? Or do you really care about Time magazine having some story that's now 10, 12, 15 years old about you lied on your resume when you know what the truth is and half of America knows what the truth is and the other half of America you don't really care about?
Yeah.
No. But the media gets by with it. Now, I am not, repeat, not going down the road that Trump goes down that says we need to change the libel laws. I'm just pointing out that the media has this amazing power. And with that power, I believe, comes responsibility, and they've abdicated the responsibility.
Yeah. You know, I'm 50-50 on the libel thing. Everyone that's watching the show knows that I am an absolute free speech absolutist.
Yes.
That's why I said absolute twice
Right.
there. But I do believe in libel laws, and I do believe we should have these laws to protect privacy and a series of other things. I don't know. I would prefer that they don't be changed because I don't think we need the government doing anything.
I agree.
I don't think we need more laws.
Right.
I don't think we need more regulations or any of that.
Right.
Yet there is something that I see so consistently these days where they just pick somebody. And it's often, I mean, it's often people that I have on this show because they're right in the thick of important conversations. And we say one thing here, and then I read the article about it the day after, and it's literally the reverse, or they cut the word "not," you know, or "didn't" instead of "did." You know,
Dave, what I have found that I find fascinating, and I know that media is in this transition. I mean, look what you and I are doing. They hate what you and I are doing right now because it throws their business model out the window.
Yeah.
I think what they, like I'll be doing a story on air, and I've got the article in front of me, and I'm a kind of a grammar nut, and I'll look at it and I'll go, holy crap, an editor never even looked at this. The Wall Street Journal, the stellar newspaper, right?
Yeah.
Have they fired all their editors? I find so many grammatical errors, punctuation errors. I just think the media is in this flux. So you add the flux with their agenda at times, their sloppiness. You add all of those things together, the media is just not filling their fourth estate responsibilities.
Yeah. So how do we clean up some of this government stuff? I suspect, although you just said you're not with Trump on the libel stuff,
right.
I suspect that there's a certain amount of deregulation that he's doing and cutting back some of these agencies that you've got to be pretty happy with.
Ecstatic about it. When you think about this, you'll find this a bizarre example, but whether it's here in California or back in Colorado, wherever we might be, I challenge people watching this. Go look at any government office, and I would bet it's the nicest office building in your community. Now, wait a minute, who paid for that? The guys in the garage who are coming up with the next big thing, some startup company, or some guy that's working an 8-to-5 blue-collar job that's got his hands dirty and his nails are cracked and he's working with his hands like crazy, they're paying for that. Shouldn't it be the reverse? Shouldn't the government actually be in the garages? Shouldn't they actually be the ones that are in the office buildings that, you know, they have to go up 20 elevators to get to their offices instead of having all the edifices that we allow them to use and create and build? We have this perverted sense that the government, and I think it's getting worse, that the government is the answer to everything and that somehow government's going to solve all of our problems. Let me tell you, the government doesn't solve problems. The government causes problems.
So what would you say the answer is related to? So DHS or FEMA now or anything else? I mean, if these things didn't exist, I'm sure somebody's watching this right now. I go, what do you mean? I mean, if these things didn't exist, well now, you know, New Orleans still is below sea level, which is a whole, let's just talk about that for a second. Because there are a certain amount of people that now say, well, wait a minute. Because they don't realize it, then they hear it and they go, wait a minute, we have a city that's below sea level, that has all of these, you know, structural problems.
Yes.
Maybe we shouldn't be living there anymore. What do you say to someone like that?
Well, first of all, I think anybody should be able to live wherever they want to live. If I want to live next to the National Forest in Boulder County, Colorado, I should be able to do that. But then I should also assume the risk of living there. If I want to live on the fault lines in California, I should be able to do that, but I should assume the risk. Now, I think government has some basic services to provide. We all agree that police protection, fire protection, that's something we all want to pay for. But if you're going to deliberately choose to live below sea level, and then why should I want to be very careful about how
Yeah,
I
yeah,
phrase this.
I can feel it already, why it's slippery, yeah.
Yeah, it's slippery because I think they should be able to live there. If you choose to live there, though, it's the responsibility of the taxpayers that live there to create those levees and build those levees and maintain those levees, because I don't live there. It's not my responsibility. I pay taxes to take care of the hazards where I live. And frankly, I don't think the government should take care of all hazards. Because if we start trying to protect the American population from all of the hazards that we face, we will end up with a totalitarian government. Because there are too many hazards.
So this is sort of the case where the people that were down there in New Orleans, that a lot, it's not just, I'm sure most of them had, or I can't say most, but I'm sure a good portion, at least of the people that had money, had insurance and probably had flood insurance and everything else. But it's that afterwards, all this federal money comes in to help the rebuild. But you're saying there, perhaps, that doesn't quite make sense. Is that basically what you're saying?
Yes, and there will be people who will say, oh my God, the former director of the Federal Emergency Management Agency is saying we should revisit. Absolutely. We have a concept of federalism in this country. We have federal, state, and local government. And at the top, let's reverse that. We have the people, we have local government, state government, and federal government. That's the order. And what we have done is we have taken the federal government and we've almost made them the local fire department. We've almost made them the local police department. And in many aspects, that's actually true. TSA, for example, we've made them the local police department, even though I want to be a lawyer here, they have no law enforcement authority. They just think they do. But they have zero law enforcement authority.
What does that actually mean? They have zero law enforcement authority. I mean, if you go through and you've got a knife in your pocket, well, then they just hand you off to whoever the local authorities are. They hand you off.
They got to get a cop.
Okay.
They got to get a cop. They can't. They can't arrest you. They can't detain you. They can't do anything. But they call themselves officers because they want to put on the mask of authority. Because government always wants to put on the mask of authority because that's how you keep the citizens kind of subdued. Yeah. Well, my whole point about FEMA becoming kind of this first responder, the more we rely on the federal government to come in after any sort of disaster, that weakens state and local governments because they become more and more dependent upon the federal government. So more and more things get nationalized. And the more things get nationalized, the more we turn into a Western European socialist type government, which we know it's not going to happen in our lifetimes. Don't get me wrong, the tinfoil hat's not on. But I do believe that republics eventually fail. And we are on this path that if we keep going down this path of throwing more and more things up against the wall for the federal government to handle and take care of, we will end up as a Western European socialist government, and over generations and generations, that leads to tyranny.
So then you must be digging Trump on this.
Oh, on this stuff, absolutely.
Yeah.
The thing that bothers me, look, the president wasn't my first choice. Yeah. And
before we go too deep on him, I do want to mention that we are taping this a little bit in advance of when it's going to air. So if anything has happened in the last couple of days, I just want to be very, very clear before they get you on some other quote.
Who knows what happens in the next few days. Wasn't my first choice, but when it came down to the typical dichotomy of Republican versus Democrat, I still think, I still want to believe that Republicans are the government of individualism and individual liberty and everything, although I could argue that they aren't necessarily that way. And the Democrats are moving to the hard progressive, almost Marxist left. So when it comes to the general election, if I want to vote for one of those two, well, I'm going to vote for Trump. I only say that because he has totally upended what it means. I worked for George W. Bush, who people thought couldn't speak well, but I thought was smart, knew what he was doing. I think Trump is smart. I think he knows what he's doing. But he's the first president in this age of Twitter and Facebook and everything else. And I just don't think we've quite figured out how to deal with that. And quite honestly, I don't think he's quite figured out how to deal with it. He hasn't quite figured out that as president, if I say something even innocuous, they're reading that in Beijing. They're reading that in Moscow. They're reading that in Pyongyang. They're reading it everywhere. And so he needs to be a little more, I just wish he would be a little more circumspect in the use of social media.
Yeah. All right, enough about Trump. Let's
Yeah.
just talk about George W. Bush for a second, because you mentioned he was your boss. You know him
Right.
well. There was the caricature, of course, of all the years of his presidency that he was some sort of idiot, or yes, he had a strange way of speaking and kind of stilted and
Right. Right. Yes.
a lot of that.
Right.
Right. He mixed up a
Yep.
lot of words. Tell me something about him that maybe would give us a little other side that we wouldn't know. Because there's an odd nostalgia. That's what I'm trying to
Yes.
say. There's an odd nostalgia about him now, because I see it from people on the left all the time now. They're sort of galvanizing him, right? They're
So
lionizing him now because of Trump.
He and I were in the limo. We were in the Beast, Southern California, going back to Marine One. And we're on these kind of rural areas. And people have lined the streets. And Eddie, who was his agent in charge of presidential detail, he kept telling Eddie, and I want to use these words carefully, Eddie, stop the car. These people want to see their president. It wasn't Eddie, stop the car, they want to see me. Eddie, don't stop the car because they want to see, hey, it's me and Brownie. No, they want to see their president. He had this understanding of that office was his temporarily, and he was everybody's president. And I saw that in that car, and then I saw it one time in the Oval Office. We were sitting, and press office comes through with a gaggle of kids, and he stops the meeting entirely and shows these kids, I mean, they must maybe 6th graders, 7th graders, shows them the Resolute desk and explains to them the history of the Resolute desk. And I'm sitting there like, holy cow, I could watch this all day long.
Yeah.
Then a third story. It was the first presidential debate of the 2004 election. Jeb, and I are in the car. We've been at some hurricane center somewhere. And Jeb turns to him and says, I think it's time for you to go to the hotel. You really need to bone up and study some. And Bush is like, nah, I'm going to whip his ass, and blah, blah, blah. He was kind of a jock. He was kind of a frat boy. When alone, he was kind of a frat boy. Jocular, funny, crack jokes, smarted off, never inappropriately, but just an ordinary human being. So these two brothers get in a fight. And I'm sitting in the jump seat facing the president like I am you, and Jeb's sitting there, and they're arguing about whether they should go back to the hotel or not. And Jeb looks at me and says, tell him. And I'm like, I am not going to get in a fight between two brothers, one who's the governor of a swing state that we've got to win this election in, and the other guy happens to be the president of the United States and my boss. I'm staying out of that fight, boys.
And what happened?
I stayed out of the fight, and Bush went to that first debate and lost big time to John Kerry.
There you go. Well, listen, it's really been a pleasure talking to you. I hope we cleaned up some of this stuff. Did we hit everything that should have been hit on?
Oh, are you kidding?
We could. I mean, I know we got
4 more days.
Yeah. You got to go do your radio show,
Yeah.
not too far from here.
Right.
But I suspect we'll do this again.
I hope so.
Yeah,
it was a pleasure.
Absolutely. Oh, and by the way, I want to mention. I'll talk to the people over here. For those of you that follow us on Patreon, so many of you know that my dog Emma is a rescue from Hurricane Katrina, and she's got a really wonderful story. So we did a video of Michael meeting Emma before, and I told her story, and that's on Patreon. And for more on Michael, you can follow him on Twitter. It's @MichaelBrownUSA.